Glenn. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait for a minute or so for everyone to join, and then we'll be shortly kicking off. Perfect. Okay, so I think we can probably make a start. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar entitled "How to Ensure Candidates Say Yes to Your Offer." My name is James Austin. I'm one of the directors here at Cohesion, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be acting, I suppose, as your host throughout today's session. I think, first of all, I want to kind of make a bit of an apology. So we were all going to be meeting up in London this afternoon and having the opportunity for a bit of a mingle, and I expect a glass or two of wine, but due to a leaky pipe and a hole in a ceiling and a very soggy floor, we've been sort of forced to do this online. But hopefully we can still have a very formative and also kind of informal discussion. And obviously explore a few sort of thoughts and trends that we're seeing within the industry at the moment. So, so thank you for everyone for joining today. Also thank you to the hosts, the panelists and speakers, which I'm going to be introducing you to in a minute. But also thank you for everyone who's joined the session today. I know diaries are forever getting busier and busier, so it's good to see so many familiar faces. And I'm not going to say strange faces, but also good to see a few unfamiliar faces to us as well. So welcome to you all as well. And also, before we kick off today, it would be remiss of me not to mention a couple of other events that we've got lined up. The next one is going to be on the 11th of October, so in a week or two's time. The title of that one is going to be Pro-Social Behaviour in Early Talent. So using psychometrics to predict positive work behaviours. And in this session, we're going to be introducing you to a platform called Pro-Social, which is an innovative new approach to recruitment processes and assessment that focuses on understanding the potential for people to work in pro-social ways. And this approach is placed in the context of changing evidence that we're seeing from recruitment and research selection. In this event, we are going to be having a Q&A session with Steve Woods. He's actually one of the creators of Pro-Social, and he's got quite a long job title, so I'm going to read this one out. He's the Professor of Work and Organisational Psychology, and also Head of Department of People and Organisations at the University of Surrey. So really interesting debate that's going to be happening in a couple of weeks' time looking at that. And then the next event isn't going to be until January, where we're going to be discussing, I suppose, not necessarily a decline, but possibly a stagnation in graduate numbers and graduate programs, but also an increase in degree level apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs as well. So I think Debs has put a link to both of those events in the chat box today. So thank you for that. So on with today's show. So if we can kind of, I'm just going to talk through a little bit and introduce everybody that's going to be on today's webinar today. So first of all, we have Martin. I don't know, Megan, if you can flip to the next slide. So Martin obviously got the memo about the white shirt and red tie. Look at that, we could almost be brothers up there, couldn't we? Martin is the Chief Executive and also founder of High Flyers, a research-based organisation. He's going to be sharing with us some of the research that his organisation undertakes and a little bit about who flyers are, but more importantly, some of the trends that we're seeing coming out of universities and students and sort of thought processes at the moment. I'm then going to hand over to Pete Milsom. Pete is the Partnerships Manager and looks after apprenticeships within UCAS. So a slightly different spin and slightly different viewpoint, but really interested to hear from Pete about what, I suppose, UCAS and sort of conversations are happening from that perspective. And then I'm going to hand over to Charlotte, who's going to run a Q&A session with some students that have recently gone through a recruitment process, a selection process, etc. And we'll have the opportunity for everyone on the call today to ask a few questions and to probe and all the rest of it. So that's the format for today's session. At the end, as ever, we will have the opportunity for a bit of Q&A. So if you've got any questions, the whole point of this is a very informal discussion group. So If you do have any questions you'd like to put to any of the speakers or indeed possibly some of the students, you can either ask to do that at the end or possibly put your question in the chat box and we can run through that at the end of the session. So that's the format for today. Before I hand over to Martin, I suppose just a little bit of context as to why we've decided to run this event today. I know everyone is fed up with the term COVID and all the implications of that. But the reality is, over the last couple of years, it's been a very different time and we're relatively in uncharted waters. So whilst we've managed COVID, I think we're now managing the impact of COVID. And we're seeing students leaving university, possibly very demotivated, unsure of their next steps, etc. You put on top of that inflation, not quite hyperinflation, but we're kind of getting there, but also a few other kind of macroeconomic factors as well. And what we're seeing as a result of that is reneges and offer reneges starting to creep up. And I think what we're trying to prove today is by making a few very simple measures and steps, actually you can take a real positive, make a positive impact and reduce that impact on your organization. So that's the content for today. Hopefully you find it of interest and relevance to your organizations. And I'm now, without further ado, going to hand over to Martin, who's going to share with us some of the thoughts and sort of insight that his organization gains on a year-to-year basis. So Martin, over to yourself.
Right, James, thank you very much indeed. So for our first session, I'm going to try and just summarise some of the latest research on the class of 2022. We've christened them the pandemic generation because anybody graduating this last summer who was on a 3-year degree course had just 6 months of normal university life before the pandemic started in March 2020. And it's fair to say they've had a very, very difficult time at university, a very difficult search for graduate jobs, and many of them have come out at the end of those 3 years really very disillusioned with the whole experience. Just a word or two about High Flyers research. I think we're probably best known for our annual student survey. The UK Graduate Careers Survey has been running since the mid-1990s. And we work with up to 70 of the country's best known and most successful graduate employers each year. They commission the research and they get a combination of face-to-face interviews with up to 1 in 5 of those who are graduating from the top universities, plus a bespoke research package, which means that we test out their marketing campaigns, we look at students' level of knowledge about their graduate programs, about their organisations, and we benchmark between all of the employers who take part in the exercise. So whilst the face-to-face interviews take place in February each year, it is a round-the-year research programme on behalf of those employers. Now, we partner with the Times newspaper and have done for the last 25 years to produce the Times Top 100 Graduate Employers. That's one of the results from our student research. So we ask every student who takes part in the survey which employer do they think offers the best opportunities for graduates. And that gives us our league table of the country's top employers, which we then in turn turn into a hardback book, a digital edition, and a website which is used by up to half of all student job hunters around the UK. And then, having spent most of our time looking at what it is that students expect to do when they leave university, we do talk to employers on a regular basis, so 2 or 3 times a year, producing our graduate market reports. And that really just tracks how many vacancies are available, practical details like starting salaries, how they recruit, what they're doing for their marketing campaigns, and from a student's perspective, perhaps most usefully, what is it that the country's top employers are looking for in the graduates that they're hiring. So in terms of the employers that we work with, I mentioned there are around about 70 each year, and they cover all the main employment sectors. So from the big investment banks, the top law firms, accounting and professional services firms, right the way through to some of the best known engineering and industrial employers, marketing organisations, banking and finance, and the public sector. And in each case, we're providing employers with that combination of market intelligence and a bespoke research package so they can test out just how effective their own graduate recruitment campaigns are around the universities. So let's dive into the results, and just a word about the methodology. We focus on the UK's top 30 universities, and these are defined as being the ones which are most often targeted either by national or international employers. So before the pandemic, that would have meant employers turning out in person to careers fairs, holding presentations on campus, a range of skills training events, drop-in sessions, all manner of local promotions. From the pandemic onwards, it's been more of a virtual presence, and it's fair to say that targeting has reduced over the last 2 years, but these are still the 30 universities that seem to get the most attention from employers, either on or offline. And you'll spot straight away, it's almost all of the Russell Group, and the other universities included on the list are often amongst the hardest to get into in terms of A-level offers. Now, we have our own student network, a manager based at each university, and they in turn recruit a local team of up to 40 local interviewers. So it means that by the time the survey takes place in February, the most recent survey, just short of 12,500 students took part in face-to-face interviews in just 10 days across the country. And we time it so that it's as close to the end of students' time at university as we can be. It's about 12 weeks before graduation. Most students, if they are job hunting in their final year, will have made applications by that point, although of course not everybody is job hunting before they leave university. But for those who have, we want to try and capture as many of their experiences as possible. So what do we know? So we ask every student each year about their plans for after university. And this is one of our main barometers in terms of student confidence and what people are aiming to do after graduation. So for the class of 2022, well, 27% thought they'd be starting a full-time graduate job. If you've not seen any of these results before, you think that's an appallingly low figure, talking about some of the most aspirational universities in the country, and only a quarter are expecting to find a graduate job. If I look back over the last 2 years, that's a much better figure than we've seen during the worst of the pandemic. And it's on a par with many of the results in the 5 or 6 years leading up to the pandemic. There are another 16% of students who expect to be looking for a graduate job, and that's a combination of those who sat out of the job search because they just want to focus on getting their first or their 2-1, so they're going to be job hunting over the summer and beyond. But at least half of this group are students who have been very actively job hunting, but sadly by the time we get to them in February, they've had nothing but rejections from employers. So it means they're resigned to the fact they're going to be late job hunters as well. So it means we do have 43% aiming for the graduate job market. There's another 4% expecting to take other work. That might be a voluntary position, it might be a temporary job. And these are often students who've had little or no work experience. And it's a common feature across all of the employers that we work with that they value work experience, and in many cases are recruiting significant numbers of their graduates through internship programs. So for graduates, final year students who've had no work experience at all, it's often useful for them to get that work experience on a short-term basis straight after they graduate. This year, just 2% thought they'd be working for themselves, running their own business. And historically, this is a very similar result to what we've seen over the last decade. Almost all of the 2% are actually running their own business already alongside their studies. So this isn't about starting something fresh. Many of them have already found a niche for themselves and are running that very successfully. So they're continuing that full-time when their degree comes to an end. But you'll see from that, we're not quite at halfway. So it means for the third year running, we have more graduates expecting to not go into the job market than are expecting to start a graduate job. No prizes for guessing the most popular alternative. In the worst of the pandemic, up to a third of all graduates went and did a panic master's, something to fill in some further study in the hope that the job market would improve by the end of that next stage. For this year, the numbers are back down to 27%, but that is high if I look back over the last 8 or 10 years. And roughly half that group are doing it for what you might describe as genuine career reasons. They're off to law school, they might be doing teacher training, they might be doing a master's for their engineering or science qualification, or even going on to a PhD. Things that are perhaps a key entry point for employers in that sector. But the other half, it's largely because students haven't worked out what they want to do next, so they're buying themselves some more thinking time. And of course, it is a very expensive option to sign up for another year or 2 years worth of study. This year, an increase in the number of taking time off or going travelling, having had almost no travel experiences during the time at university. Many of this year's cohort very, very keen to catch up on that. So 1 in 8 planning to take time off. But sadly, that left us this year with 12% who, being questioned less than 3 months before university was going to come to an end, after 3 or 4 years worth of study, simply had no idea what was going to happen next. And this is the group that worries everybody. This is the group that universities are working hard on. This is the group which employers are trying to reach out to, because there is no difference in terms of first and 2-1s, the quality of people's CVs. The ones in that category that do stand out because they have less engagement with employers and less engagement with the job hunting process. So that's the national picture. What about at local level? Well, the reason we interview 12,500 students is so we can break all of our data down campus by campus. So we provide employers who are participating in the research programme with a separate report on each institution. So if you're recruiting from Durham, do students there behave differently to those studying in Manchester or Leeds? And then within that, does somebody who wants to work in investment banking go about job hunting in a different way to somebody who wants to work in engineering, tech or science? So you can see here, if we look at our 43% as the average across the country, there's a whole cluster of universities there on that left-hand side: Aston, Bath, Surrey, LSE, Southampton, Warwick, Loughborough, all over 50% expecting to join the job market. And it's no coincidence that those universities often are the ones that have the strongest element of work experience built into their courses, or some of the best links with engineering, business and tech employers. So what do we make of some of the lower figures? Places like Oxford and Cambridge, still amongst the most targeted universities. Well, they're in the lower third. And right at the bottom, places like Cardiff, Glasgow, Liverpool and Imperial College. Well, conversely, those universities have the highest proportion who go on to further study. So it means their graduates will be available for recruitment, but just not for another year or two, and with some additional qualifications to offer at that point. So that's students' basic plans. Which areas have they been applying for? What type of jobs do the class of 2022 want to go on to? Well, this is a record of all the applications they've made by the end of February and the applications they were expecting to make later in the year. And you can see that the top 3, consulting is number 1, media number 2, and marketing is the 3rd most popular destination for 2022. Now, it's interesting, that's a record figure for consulting, the highest we've ever seen for that sector, and indeed the highest we've ever seen for any sector. So 1 in 5 of this year's graduates wanting to work in consulting. And whether that's business consulting for one of the strategy consulting houses, or perhaps one of the big 4 accounting and professional services firms, or whether it's engineering consulting or technical consulting, it's a very broad category. But let me just pick out both them and investment banking, just so you can see how things have changed over time. Consulting has been the top destination now for 8 years running, and it's been a meteoric rise from 15 years ago, when 1 in 10 students wanted to work in consulting, to double that figure today for 2022. If you look at investment banking, well, that's one of the sectors that weathered the last 2 years, probably the best out of all of them. No dip in recruitment across the top investment banks, and indeed many of them have had some of their most profitable years. And the number of vacancies for new graduates holding up really very well indeed. So you can see there are more new graduates wanting to work in investment banking than at any time since our records began. There are a number of sectors, though, where applications have gone down. So fewer people applying for media, marketing, charity or voluntary work, accountancy, teaching and engineering. That's fair to say we're not short of applicants for media. If these figures are right, we're looking at around 52,000 new graduates wanting to work in broadcasting, journalism, advertising, PR, some of the more glamorous destinations within the media. But in reality, there are, if we're lucky, 500 or 600 paid graduate roles each year in the sector. So it means that many students find themselves, when they graduate, going on to unpaid internships or other short-term experiences, trying to get a toehold within the media. It's the worst result we've ever seen for teaching. So just at the point where we have a national crisis, we have a shortage of teachers, the numbers wanting to work in teaching is at an all-time low. And it's interesting that the numbers applying for engineering roles, but partly because engineers are disappearing off for jobs in consulting instead, but that's now at its lowest level for 15 years. And you can see the recent peak in 2017, it's been a generally downward trend since then. So what about students' aspirations for their first graduate job? When they leave university, what is it they're hoping to go on to? So some practical things. What type of organisation would they like to join? Well, top of the list is still joining a major national or international company. And that's often about the perception of better training, a more structured programme, potentially a higher starting salary as well, and a more organised progression through the organisation once they're off the graduate programme. But 1 in 5 happy to join an SME, and 1 in 7 off to join the government or elsewhere in the public sector. We check each year where in the country new graduates want to work. This result has never changed. Our first survey back in 1995 said the answer was London, and the answer is still London. 28 years later. And it's fascinating that this is one of the highest results we've ever seen. So 53% of student job hunters expecting to work in London. And that's often because they perceive it as a better choice of employment, perhaps a higher starting salaries, better remuneration in the medium term, and of course staying in touch with all their friends who are moving to London as well. In reality, fewer than a quarter of all graduate jobs are based within the M25. So by definition, all of the other regions around the UK are underrepresented in terms of where graduates say they'd like to work. So what is it that's important to students for that first graduate job? Well, you can see there, top of the list comes having a good social life through work. So bearing in mind, many of this year's cohorts were literally locked in their student accommodation at the beginning of their second year, and they've had very little of the normal student societies, sport, drama, music, all of the good things that people enjoy around their studies. So the idea that they can make up for lost time and have a good social life through work, perhaps no surprise, that's number one. But it's interesting that number two, a job that allows you to give something back to society. So if you think about employers like Teach First and Frontline, Teach First celebrating its 20th anniversary next year, they brought through up to 1,500 graduates a year to work in teaching for 2 years before you go off and start in another career area. So that's all about giving back, using your skills as a graduate to help schools in disadvantaged areas improve the education they offer for their students. Some of the themes for this year, well, we've never seen such a high figure. 1 in 3 focusing on work-life balance, not working evenings or weekends. So I guess they need to choose their sector very carefully if that is a priority. And we've got 2 legacies from the pandemic. So 1 in 3 students saying it's incredibly important to them that they be based in an office or on site rather than at home when they start work. So they want to be with their new colleagues, they want to be on site, they want to be learning face-to-face as opposed to yet more virtual experiences. And you can see there just 18% said it's very important to them to be able to work from home for some of the time. Now, of course, for those of you who've been in the workforce for years and years, the idea of working from home has been incredibly appealing over the last 2 years. For new joiners, they seem to want the exact opposite. They really want to experience the company firsthand. And every year we do ask about money. So what is it that students expect as a graduate starting salary? In a crisis, those expectations go into the background. So in the recession in 09 and 10, we can see 12 years ago that expectations dipped. The priority was just get a job if you can. And we're in a similar situation for 2021. Many students fearing that the job market was really struggling after the worst of the pandemic. So much lower expectations. This year, it's jumped to over 27,000 for the first time. And again, if you break our results down by institution, you can see there are some huge gaps between top and bottom. London School of Economics gets the prize for being the most ambitious students this year. An average of 36,300 is what their graduates are expecting, compared with the likes of Liverpool and Lancaster, where the average is closer to 23,000. And what this really tells us is that although we're operating in a national job market, the local influences and the local job market, where many students have had internships or local work experience, that paints a very different picture. So many of those who are going for careers in the city, based in London, will be expecting much higher starting salaries. Those who are aiming for elsewhere in the country, the expectations are perhaps rather more realistic. So how on earth do students make decisions based on all these different criteria? So we do ask when they're making applications, what is it that really matters? So thankfully, for over half of students, they say that the content of work is the most important feature. So 51% describing that as very important, but lots of emphasis on quality training and development. Some students looking very closely at the location of where their graduate jobs will be, work-life balance showing up in the top 5 there as well. And if I pick out for you just how much emphasis people are now putting on the organisation itself, you can see there having high ethical standards, being committed to diversity and inclusion, and being environmentally friendly and eco-conscious. All of those key ingredients when students are deciding which organisations they should apply for. And interestingly, given all of the upset and turmoil and disruption from the pandemic, more emphasis this year on things like job security, being able to work for an employer long term, and joining a program which offers a guaranteed job at the end of it. So you're not just signing up for 18 months or 2 years, you want the opportunity to be able to stay for a long-term career. And then just a couple of cheeky questions about the future. So the first was, how long do graduates expect to stay with their first employer? Well, 5% think they may well be out in the first 12 months, another half gone in years 1 or 2, a third staying for 3 or 4 years, and you can see they're just 11% clinging on for 5 years or longer. And I don't think this is a prediction that most employers ever lose nearly 90% of their new graduates, or at least I hope it is. And what it does tell us, though, is that most students aren't looking very far into the future. They want to be treated as if they could stay for a long-term career, but in reality, they're only looking 2 or 3 years into the future. And many of them believe that it'll be their decision as to whether they move on at the end of that period. On average, around 2.5 years is the time perspective for most graduates. So that is really helpful to know in terms of marketing campaigns. It's all about emphasising what happens in the first 12 months, the first 24 months, the real focus for many new graduates. And then a question just about their long-term aspirations. So what might they have done by the age of 30? 30 being a point, probably one of the really big first milestones when you leave university, 8-9 years after graduating. And we gave them the shopping list of things that they might or might not have done by that point. 2/3 expect to have their own house or flat. Around half think they'll be married, although much smaller numbers will have started a family. Lots of overseas expectations, so either living and working in a different country or just lots and lots of holidays. You can see there 6 lines down. And no lack of ambition. Think back to our original pie chart, only a quarter knowing that they were definitely aiming for the graduate job market. We can see here over a fifth are expecting to be earning over 100,000 a year by the age of 30. So we should perhaps stay in touch and see how that turns out. And then, given that they've only just started work, the cheek of it, that bottom line there, 1 in 10 think they'll have had time to have a career break, and lots more aspiration for people to work for themselves. So even though very few doing that straight out of university, 1 in 6 setting up their own business, hopefully by the age of 30, so a much higher proportion. But there is one dismal line in there, 3 up from the bottom, the proportion who expect to repay their student debts and loans, that is at an all-time low, and for very good reason. This year, for the first time, debts have gone over the 42,000 mark. So typically, around 60% of students are now getting help from their parents, paying tuition fees or their costs of living while they are a student. But even with that, on average, graduates from these universities leaving with debts of over £42,000. And you can see there, just in 10 years, as the fee system has changed, the average debts have more than doubled. So let me finish just by saying a word or two about job hunting. And of course, during the pandemic, every employer had to move almost all of their promotions online. We went from in-person careers fairs to virtual careers fairs, in-person on-campus presentations to remote virtual presentations and skills training events, and almost no activity at all in person with careers services or elsewhere on campus. So we did ask students who graduated this summer what they made of all of that, and I think it's fair to say that they are very, very strongly in favour of employers returning in person. And one of the reasons for this is that, of course, if you think of the timeline of the pandemic, It struck in March 2020. So for students who graduated this last summer, that was their first year. In their second year, they were back on campus, but everything within the university was done remotely, so online lectures and online tuition. And employers stayed away from campus, but they then stayed away for a second year for students' final year. So even though many universities opted to go back to all manner of in-person promotions and teaching and tuition on campus, employers simply stayed away for the majority of last year. So when we asked students if they'd been to an on-campus fair versus an in-person fair versus a virtual event, 77% said they preferred on-campus fairs. 76% said they preferred on-campus presentations compared to online events, and 70% preferred on-campus skills events compared to 30% for online events. And across all of the students we talked to, 3/4 said that it'd been much, much harder to find out about employers during the pandemic because of the lack of presence on campus. And a whopping 87% said that now that the world has returned to normal, employers should be back out on campus for this coming recruiting season. And just to underline what a big difference it's made to individual employers. So I mentioned the 70 employers that we work closely with. We profile them each year. And if I look back to the profile they achieved in 2020, we were tracking in 2020 how many students had seen on-campus promotions by the individual employers who'd taken part in the research. And each of these bars represents the profile. So for the most prolific employers, they were reaching almost 40% of students at their target universities. If I overlay the equivalent results from 2022, you'll see how the chart changes. So all of the numbers jump down, and this time the question has changed. So 2 years ago, we were looking at, have you seen on-campus promotions? Now we're saying, have you seen any promotions at all for these employers? And if we look at how things have changed, you can see for certain organisations on the left-hand side there, they've lost half of their profile or worse during the course of the pandemic, and just 4 organisations on the right there who've made any sort of gain by moving their campaigns online. On average, across the 50 employers that took part in the survey in both 2020 and 2022, on average, their profile has dropped by 23%. So that's made a huge difference in terms of their appeal to new graduates and the level of applications they've received, and of course the quality of the applicants who they're attracting for their organisations. So there we are, a whistle-stop tour of some of the headlines from the class of 2022. I hope that sets the scene for the rest of this afternoon's debate, but I'm going to hand back to James.
Perfect. Martin, I knew it would be, but that was really interesting and engaging kind of overview of the market, and I suppose some of the trends and kind of what we're seeing, you know, from students coming out of university at the moment. A couple of interesting things that I pulled out. I'm sure everyone's got their kind of own takeaways. I think you mentioned the 12% of individuals not knowing what they wanted to do. I think that's obviously a very, very key part of the market, and absolutely emphasizes that increased engagement throughout university, etc. I also think with a degree of irony that point about consultancy being the highest, you know, more and more people wanting to go into consultancy, but not wanting to work antisocial hours. So there may be a reality hit for a lot of people as and when they move into reality. But that was really, really interesting. So thank you very much for sharing those sort of slides with us. Following on with the theme, I'm now going to hand over to Pete from UCAS, and Pete will obviously share the views and thoughts from his perspective and that of UCAS. So Pete, let me hand over to yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much, James. And I second your comments, Martin. That was really interesting. It's really interesting to see the responses from the people that you talk to, which is kind of post-application, and the responses from the audience that we talk to, which is kind of pre-application. So it'd be interesting to sort of compare notes in the journey there. My name is Pete Milsom, and I am Partnerships Manager at UCAS, and I work on the apprenticeship program at UCAS. Now, whilst I don't think I can give you that one secret answer to making your candidates say yes, I think what I can share with you is some of the insights and stories that our unique UCAS data tells us. And I hope that you may be able to use these to help steer your recruitment plans and secure that talent that you need for the future of your organization. So if we can just go to the second slide there, slide 2, please. I'm going to start by looking back at the last few years. And since 2006, we've seen the number of people applying to university through UCAS gradually increase by 250,000 to around 750,000 per year. And during that time, we've seen various things. We've seen that the 18-year-old population in the UK during that time, since 2006, has declined, but we've seen more of them applying to university. And then if we go to slide 3, please. Some key takeaways here, but market forces now are having much more of an impact on the behaviour of universities and applicants than they did back in 2006. And universities are competing for students much as employers are competing for the best candidates. Degree apprenticeships were rolled out in 2015, and they're shaping up to be a credible option up against the university degree. And then looking more to the future, by 2026, we reckon at UCAS that we will see over 1 million applicants apply to universities every year. And that's double the number that we saw in 2006. And this is driven partly by the increase in mature students and international students, but largely this increase will be due to a boom in the 18-year-old population at this time. So 35% of that increase is due to the boom in the 18-year-old population. So we can just go through to slide 4, please. These 2026 applicants, they're currently 13 or 14 years old in year 9, and they're already thinking about their future careers. And I did mention degree apprenticeships, and I'll mention them again because in the context of 1 million university applicants, they will become an increasingly important part of the recruitment mix. And this is because we reckon that universities will only be able to provide places for 70% of those million applicants for undergraduate degrees. And you know, the mathematicians amongst you would have worked out that that leaves 300,000 applicants per year looking for opportunities other than an undergraduate or university degree, such as apprenticeships or the lifelong learning entitlement, for example. Degree apprenticeships have the potential to meet a lot of this need, much of this need, but at the moment, there are only 3,500 level 4 and above apprenticeship starts out there. I say level 4 and above because that's roughly where we are with the academic equivalent of undergraduate degrees. Though there's only 3,500 level 4 starts for apprenticeships against that 300,000 figure. So you can see on the horizon, there is a massive supply and demand issue looming. So that's a look back. So let's take a look ahead. And also let's have a look where we are right now. And to give you an idea of what sort of opportunities our current crop of career choosers are looking at. Today, our UCAS pre-applicant database, and that's essentially our list of next year's potential university applicants, that already stands at the moment at 665,000 people. If we go to slide 5, please. Oh, sorry, can you just click back one back? There we go. So we can see that the top subjects of interest from our pre-applicant database. We got business studies there, medicine, law and psychology leading the pack. And computer science there at number 5, and sport and exercise science at number 10 on the list. And you can see the top 10 there on that slide. If we go through to slide 6, please. I was hoping to see some of the career finder data there. Perhaps it's back a couple. Okay, seems not to be there, so I'll just tell you. Just before we go on to that, out of all these pre-applicants that I've talked about, just over half of them would say that they would like further information on apprenticeships. And that demonstrates that there's an increasing appetite for considering career routes other than university amongst our audience. And also our UCAS Career Finder tool, which is kind of our apprenticeships jobs board. We can say that the most searched for apprenticeship opportunities today, the top three are engineering, law, and business. So I'm not sure that there are too many surprises for you there, but the research that we've undertaken by talking to our pre-applicants, they do provide some indications as how to engage people considering their early careers options. And I'll just go through some of the findings we found. These are kind of the top three that we found. So number one, start reaching students from a young age. Our research shows that a typical student will start to consider their career options from year 9 onwards. And in fact, 1 in 3 say that they start thinking about their options in primary school. We also found that, perhaps contrary to popular belief, where students go to find out more information on their careers is very heavily guided by their teachers and to some extent their parents. And they tend to look where they're told to look, and there isn't really much self-discovery involved in that journey. So they go where they're advised to go by their teachers. Our applicants tell us that most of the detailed discovery and careers consideration is done at school. So employers working directly with schools and partnering with organisations that connect them to schools and advisors is pretty critical to engaging young people in their early careers opportunities. And it's also worth emphasising the importance of early engagement and that gap that there is with this polling response, that only 11% of our respondents said that they had received enough careers advice. 9% said that they had received none at all, and 1 in 5, and this is quite stark, 1 in 5 say that they had inadvertently closed off a career route because of poor selections at GCSE stage. So there's a big appetite for that early careers guidance there. Our second key finding, it really matters that employers get their opportunities promoted where their audience already does its research. So in this same piece of research, we asked people about their experiences in researching career opportunities. And one of the biggest frustrations for both students and careers advisors actually was having to use multiple resources to find out about different career routes and to apply for those opportunities as well. And there's certainly an appetite and a market for having all of this in one place. And for example, we found that our students, when we asked them, were much more likely to go to places like our UCAS Career Finder platform to look for opportunities than to individual employer websites for opportunities. So getting opportunities promoted in places where students are already invested is much more likely to cut through to career choosers. And our third takeaway is to really show what it is like to work with you. A consistent trend in our focus groups and polling is the need for students to be able to see what it's really like to work for a company. And they're seeking out content that gives a deep experience of what will be ahead of them in the next few years. And that really matters to us. They say yes to an opportunity. And it could be traditional work experience. It could be case studies. But also they are increasingly taking advantage of platforms that offer virtual work experience. And even more importantly, and this is really important, that the numbers are quite high for this, peer-to-peer content and contact. They really want to talk to people who are experiencing or who have recently experienced a similar opportunity to kind of get the inside scoop in what a day or a week or a year is like with an employer. Whether that's a graduate opportunity or an apprenticeship, they really want to speak to people like them. They really want to know what it's like in these work opportunities and these employment opportunities. That was really key. So if we can just go on to slide 9, please, and we'll go back to apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. And just to talk a little bit about why UCAS is looking to shift the image and perception of apprenticeships to make it known that apprenticeships are just as much of a positive and aspirational choice as the university route, and to encourage employers to take advantage of the benefits that apprenticeships can bring. And really, one of the first reasons, or the main reason, I suppose, is that we owe it to our audience to put skills and apprenticeships options side by side with the undergraduate options. If we can just go on to slide 10, please. Thank you. And we can see from our data here that our pre-applicants tell us that interest in apprenticeships is particularly strong in certain sectors, and that's particularly engineering, business and computer science. But we do see an increase in that across most of our sectors. And everyone knows UCAS as an admissions service for university, but with over half of those pre-applicants saying that they would like to know more about apprenticeships, and if we just go through to slide 11 there, please. There's 2.2 million searches on our Career Finder jobs board at the moment. That's up 56% on last year. And there is a significant and increasing demand for these apprenticeships options to be displayed side by side with the undergraduate choices. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not suggesting and I'm not hoping that apprenticeships should be promoted above university. There's definitely room for both routes there. And I'm really more saying that both routes need to have that parity of prestige, and kind of addressing this image problem that perhaps we have with apprenticeships is going to be really beneficial to employers trying to recruit their top talent. And it's getting much more competitive as well. And we've got employers like Goldman Sachs, employers like Rolls-Royce running big apprenticeship programs. And you can really see a point in the future, probably not too distant future, that these opportunities for apprenticeships become just as prestigious and just as competitive as entry into Oxford and Cambridge undergraduate degrees, because of the opportunities that these large companies, these big high-profile companies are offering. There are very few career routes that aren't accessible via an apprenticeship now. There's even a doctor apprenticeship that I think is being launched in 2023, and routes into tech and law and business, they're all there, as well as the more traditional careers like engineering or construction that you might associate with apprenticeships. If we just go through to slide 12 now, please. You can see some sort of key stats here, but the story of them really is that there's still a lot of work to do in changing the perceptions of the apprenticeship option. So we can see that only that 76% of our audience said they associated the word prestigious with university, but that's again only 4% associating the same word with apprenticeships. So in essence, the post-16 choices and options for people are increasing. So the variety of options are increasing. But each of those choices are becoming more and more competitive over the years, and we've got no reason to believe that they won't increase in competitiveness over the next few years as we go towards that million applicants in 2026. So we really believe, and indeed people are, and it's going to be increasing in the future, that people will look to UCAS to help them navigate these choices, make sense of them, and give people what they need to make the best choices, be that university, apprenticeships, or other options. And we'll get those options right in front of them, side by side, to help them make the best choices they can. So with that landscape and that horizon in mind, I'll just recap on what our UCAS data and research tell us about how to make candidates say yes to your offer. So that's number one, reach out early. Number two, reach them where they're already looking. And three, show them as deeply as you can about the experience that they'll have if they take your opportunity. And really importantly here, and I do work on the apprenticeships program at UCAS, so it's attempting to make this unbiased, but really make your apprenticeship opportunities as attractive as you can, as attractive as your graduate opportunities, and really make the most of those choices available to career choosers. Thank you very much. I think I will leave it there.
Pete, thank you so much indeed. You know, I was going to do a synopsis at the end to kind of these are the key things, but I think you've very articulately done that for me. So thank you. Again, yeah, really insightful discussion there. And I think that kind of that chasm that we're going to experience in a few years' time where, you know, there are a million applications, but, you know, a finite number of opportunities is really, it's an opportunity, I think, for a lot of organizations to start building that runway now, so that they can obviously onboard those various, you know, apprenticeship opportunities over the next few years. So absolutely. Yeah, very grateful for your time there. I'm just keeping half an eye on the watch. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Charlotte. We've obviously heard from Martin and very much a kind of graduate focused talk. Obviously now from Pete with a slightly sort of different perspective with the apprenticeships. So kind of, I suppose the most critical point is actually speaking to some of the students themselves. So Charlotte, I'm going to hand over to you, and let's hear what some of our students are saying.
Great, thanks James, and thanks Pete and Martin for those segments before. Sort of super interesting. I was making lots of notes in the background, so thank you for going through that. So hi everyone, just very quickly and briefly, my name's Charlotte and I'm the Early Careers Manager here at Cohesion, and I'd like to introduce to you the student panel. I was reflecting on this earlier, actually. We're calling it a student panel, but actually Abbas, Gail and Lillian have all graduated. So it's much more of a graduate panel than a student panel, but all have been students over the past couple of years and have certainly been that kind of class of the pandemic throughout their time at university. So Abbas, Gail and Lillian, I'm hoping all three of you are on the call on the Zoom. I have seen your names. Although I can't quite see you at the moment just with my setup. So I am hoping, fingers crossed, that you're all here. What will probably be useful is just to do some introductions, so all three of you can introduce yourself to the audience, and probably just for ease, if we go down in the alphabetical order there, and it will be useful just to introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit of background, so obviously where you work, what your role is, and perhaps when you started work and when you graduated. So Abbas, if you're there, it'd be great if you could kick off with your intro.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charlotte. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Abbas Amin. I graduated with an undergrad in economics from UCL in 2020 now. So yeah, my last few months of university were online. I took a year out before joining the Ofwat grad scheme as an economist, which is part of the civil service, in September 2021. So yeah, I've been in the job for over a year now and I've kind of thoroughly enjoyed it so far. So yeah, I think those are the key things there.
Great, thank you. And then Gail, if you're there, it'd be great to hear from you and hear your introduction.
Hi, I'm Gail. I'm just recently graduated from the Newcastle University with an undergrad in nutrition. Just this past summer, I've been in my job now with Samworth Brothers for about 4 weeks. But I was in my second year when COVID hit, and I was very lucky and had a placement during that time. And because worked in food, was an essential worker, so a lot of my studies weren't actually that affected compared to some of my colleagues on the degree this past year.
Great, thank you. And then Lillian.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lillian Thomas and I work at Barrett Developments. I'm on their grad scheme and I'm in the HR department, so I'm an early careers advisor. I started university in 2018 and studied psychology at the Uni of Bristol, and then graduated in summer of 2021. So COVID hit during my second year, and unlucky for me, unlike Gail, I didn't have a placement year, so it was very much online learning, which I think kind of took away from that experience as a whole. So that's why I took a year out after uni to try and just build up some work experience and figure out what I wanted to do. So yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks, everyone. So all three of you, they're actually graduating kind of across 3 different years, but all three of them being either very much into a COVID world or a post-COVID world. And it sounds like all three of you have had quite a different experience, but ultimately have all found yourself in a graduate scheme at the end of it, which is obviously great to hear. So thanks, Debs. Kind of basically just said in the chat what I was about to say. So any questions for the student panel, please do pop them in the chat and we'll be happy to go through them. But guys, I suppose sort of a question from me after hearing from both Martin and Pete of their sections around the high flyers research and the UCAS data. I don't know if you had any reflections yourself on what you heard on some of the data or some of the insights that they had, anything that kind of rings true to your experience or anything that you sound surprised by at all.
I think for me, when Pete mentioned about making sure a graduate knows what it's actually like to work at the company, I think that's quite a big deal. I was lucky enough to actually undertake some work experience with Barrett Developments from September to this April. And that gave me an amazing insight into what it actually was like to work there and what the culture was like. And that ultimately made me want to apply for their graduate scheme, because I knew that it would be something that would be right for me and something that I could develop in. So I think, yeah, that really rang true.
And Abbas and Gail, did you do any work experience before you ultimately joined your graduate schemes?
Yeah, I did a brief stint as like working as an assistant for a warehouse, doing some of the logistics there. Yeah.
I obviously did my placement year, but that wasn't with Samworth Brothers, that was with a different company. But I wouldn't have gone into food industry if I hadn't have done that placement. So that was pretty important for me to have that experience and know what I wanted to do coming out of uni, because especially with my degree, nutrition, you can go into quite a few different fields. You can do dietetics or go into food industry or do something slightly different. And when I started uni, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So that work experience made a real difference.
It sounded like it sort of added real value to your decision-making process in what it was that you wanted to go on and do next. And Gail, what did you learn then from your placement year, both around what you wanted to do, but equally maybe some of the things that you didn't want to do, or maybe you didn't want to go into for your graduate scheme?
Yeah, so I'm in technical role in Samworth at the minute. I'm in process, which is something that I actually didn't manage to do on placement, but with the placement that I had, I was within a team, but I was able to do lots of different roles and sort of weave myself into the company in quite a varied way. So I got to experience a lot of things. I did stuff with operations, I did stuff with the quality side. I also did quite a lot of technical admin role as well. And I think having that breadth and having that different experience was really helpful. And then I'd considered being a dietitian. But because I did the placement, I was there for 11 months. Even during COVID, I think food industry during COVID was very intense because of everything with the supermarkets and people couldn't go out and eat. So that experience really made me want to work for within the industry. And I just didn't fancy being a dietitian after that because I'd found what I wanted to do.
Yeah. No, that's great, thank you. So question to all three of you then, and obviously each of you have graduated in slightly different years, and obviously Lillian, you were saying that you took a bit of a break and a bit of a gap year from graduating to joining, and we've definitely seen a shift from kind of having a very sort of employer-led market, meaning there's thousands of candidates applying for very few roles in kind of peak COVID times, and moving to a more student or graduate-led market where now we're seeing that there's lots and lots of graduate positions sort of at pre-COVID levels, but we don't have the same number of candidates who are actually applying to them. So I'm intrigued to know kind of from all three of you, how many applications, if you can cast your mind back, how many graduate applications did you make? So Abbas, I'm picking on you here, but you graduated the longest ago, but can you remember how many applications you made in that year?
So I was applying, I guess, just when COVID hit, there weren't many jobs around. So I must have done easily around 40, 50 applications.
Wow.
And I guess the issue I encountered was it was open, but then when you go to apply and you apply, they kind of cancel the graduate scheme halfway through, or they just cancel the scheme because of COVID.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of your experience, I would imagine, and obviously I don't want to speak on your behalf, but were your priorities just securing a graduate job at the time? Was that your key priority?
Yeah, so like once I graduated, my plan was to take a year out, but obviously because of COVID, I couldn't really do the traveling that I wanted to. So it's either between kind of panic masters or just apply for jobs. Didn't really want to study anymore. So I was looking at a few jobs and there weren't many graduate schemes around. So I thought, let me just do something short term for the 6-7 months and then reapply in the next grad cycle where I found offer.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I suppose how did your priorities change, or perhaps if you were applying as of today in a world that we could kind of coin post-COVID, do you think your priorities would be different there? Because we saw with some of the data from Martin that some finalist priorities are around things like development, location is quite key, especially with cost of living crisis, the kind of the work-life balance. So if you were maybe graduating now, what do you think your priorities would be from your employer?
I guess I'd like location-wise, I'd like to be in London. I'd also want that balance between working from home and going into the office. Like when I graduated, the norm was going into the office, but now more and more I'm kind of working from home, and it's convenient only having to go in 2-3 times a week rather than the 4 to 5 days. So yeah, I guess those are kind of just two things coming to the top of my head on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it sounds like it's quite in line with some of that data from High Flyers there, with sort of what people are wanting when they're coming out of university this year.
Exactly, yeah.
Great, thank you. So Lillian, I think there's been a question for you in the chat, so let me just quickly open that. Yes, here we go. So I guess first question to you, Lillian, sort of from me, again similar to Abbas, is around sort of how many applications did you make? But I suppose leading on from that, did you apply elsewhere, or did the work experience that you had with Barratt sort of really affirm your decision, and did that maybe have a sway on how many applications you felt like you needed to make because your decision had been made based on your work experience?
Yeah, so I actually applied to a much more limited number of companies. I think it was under 5 in the end. And I think, yeah, that was definitely the case for me in terms of the work experience, swinging my viewpoint of where I wanted to work and who I wanted to apply for. Because the work experience more generally made me aware of the fact that I knew I wanted to go into HR. So that slimlined those applications down, and then specifically working for Barratt and working with the people that I had been working with and understanding the culture really helped me to affirm my decision with that application too. So yeah, a much more limited pool of applications in terms of that.
Yeah, and I suppose if you compare that to Abbas as well, that's a big difference from around sort of 45 applications to your 5.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I suppose you mentioned there that it was things like the culture and the people that really helped affirm your decision to want to work at Barratt. But I suppose you could argue that you could actually do a career in HR anywhere. It's not particularly industry specific. So what was it about your experience of the culture and people that was so key to you to deciding that was a place that you wanted to pursue your career?
So I think for me, feeling supported is like a really key thing for my day-to-day work. But not only that, but like having the balance between feeling supported and being given responsibility, because I think it's quite a fine balance to actually achieve, because you can maybe over support someone and then they feel like they're being micromanaged. But I felt as though the balance in Barratt was great. I felt as though I could actually take control of things and have my own mark on projects, but then also I knew that whenever I needed, there was someone to call, someone to have a chat with. And I think that really helped me develop in the workplace. Yeah,
that's great. It's great. Thank you. So sort of another kind of question from me, and sort of something that's kind of popped up in a direct message to me here on Zoom, and thinking about your experiences at university, and obviously, like I said, with all 3 of you graduating across different years, probably had a very different experience with employer engagement and campus activity. So what was really important to you or for you from an engagement point of view? What did you see from employers, either the employers that you're currently working for now, or other employers that you applied to, that kind of really hooked you in through the engagement that they were doing? So what did you see, or what did you engage with that you really liked? So Gail, if you don't mind, I'll come to you first on that one.
I don't actually think I saw anything from the companies that I applied to. So I only applied to 2 during for my grad roles, and got Samworth and got rejected from the other one. I don't really remember any careers things on whilst I was at uni. I did go to a careers fair in second year for placement, and I did see some engagement there, but that was pre-COVID. So a lot of it I think was online, and the time that I was looking for jobs was coinciding with my dissertation, so I was quite challenged that way. So I looked for specific companies that I knew did what I wanted to do within technical and food industry. So I sort of honed what I wanted and then found it that way. So yeah, I didn't see anything really at uni.
I suppose you had the benefit of having done your work experience and knowing what you wanted to go into. You're aware of the brands that you were interested in.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't need that more kind of, casting the net wider just to see what was out there for your
Yeah,
opportunity.
and I think for what I wanted to do, there was very few grad schemes because I wanted a structured scheme for starting my career, because on placement I'd done so many different things. And what appealed to me about Samworth was having the different locations, and then having a structured, this is what you can do, okay, we're going to move you for different roles, and having that sort of experience around the company, because I think I wanted to experience all areas to then actually finally know what within technical and what within the food industry I wanted to do. So I think mine was maybe perhaps a little bit different, which is why I searched out for the ones that I wanted.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And Abbas, I suppose same question to you, really, thinking about how employers try to engage with you kind of on campus or virtually. What was important to you, or what stood out to you as a good way to engage with you as a student?
So yeah, on campus, there's the careers fair, which like walked around, loads of companies there, giving out leaflets and so forth, trying engagement there. Also, like through societies, they'd invite a few companies, like individuals from companies. I just come on a Zoom call or in person. We can have like informal chat, and you get to like, someone there, so you can ask them what the job is. I know Ofwat did this thing where they get their grads to like come on a Zoom call, and then it's like almost like an open day, I guess, where prospective like joiners kind of join that call, can ask questions, figure out more, and that's usually just a few days like before their applications open. So those who apply kind of know what to put in their application going forward. So that's pretty good. Also found like companies who have their like websites updated to reflect like and put views in from what the recent grads have done. I found that particularly helpful as well, rather than being like 5-6 years out of date. I'm not really sure what I can expect now. So those are kind of the few engagement things that I found useful when I was applying.
Yeah, no, that's great, thank you. And that sort of links into what Pete said around sort of that peer-to-peer learning and engagement is really important, and seeing someone on the website or on a Zoom chat or at a careers fair, and you think, okay, they were probably in my shoes 1 year ago, 2 years ago, it probably resonates a little bit more with you than maybe someone who's been in the job for 30 years. Maybe.
Yeah, and given it's slightly informal, you don't have to worry about like how to phrase your questions, or you can just, it's so much more friendly.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Lillian, probably same question to you as well. Obviously, we're all here to understand how we can engage more with students to get them to say yes to our offers. So from your point of view, when you were in your final year or your penultimate year, what was it that really stood out to you from an employer engagement point of view that really hooked you in?
So I think being in COVID in second and third year meant that actually I wasn't engaging in a lot of opportunities from employers, and I feel like there was probably people in my position, but then maybe other people who were reaching out to employers because they knew what they wanted to do post university in a COVID world. But I think that was just the specific situation that I was in. But going through processes this year, I would say it's having communication with the employers, not feeling as though I'm just being left behind in a recruitment process. I know that I've probably received an automatic email and then don't hear from them for 2 months. I think that's not engaging at all. Whereas if you receive that email and then you maybe get a call from someone, or you get an email from someone trying to support you through that process, I think that really helps with my engagement in a company.
No, that's perfect. And Lillian, thank you, because you have set me up perfectly for what my next question was going to be for you all. That was so well choreographed. So thank you for that. So I mean, it would be sort of remiss of me not to ask you all questions or kind of a question or two about the recruitment process. Ofwat, Samworth Brothers and Barratt Developments are all kind of partnered with, or we partner with these organisations here at Cohesion to support with the recruitment process. And we'll have spoken to all three of you and supported all three of you ultimately from your application through to receiving your offer. And of course, it's one thing to hook people in with some engagement, but you also have to have a good experience throughout that process to want to join the organisation. So I suppose for a question to all three of you, and Gail, maybe if I come to you first, obviously you've only recently just started at Samworth Brothers. Was there anything that you found really helped and supported you in your recruitment process that ensured that you felt that Samworth Brothers was somewhere that you wanted to work?
Yeah, I think when I first did the application, you obviously, as Lillian says, get like an automatic email, but there was definitely, it felt like there was somebody on the other end that actually read through my application. I think during the first stage, I had to submit my CV. And then I did video interviews, and it felt very much like it wasn't just an algorithm that was sort of reading through them. It was very much like, okay, there's people that are looking at my application compared to the job that I didn't, I wasn't too keen on the other one that I applied for, because it was very much like it's automatic and there's no personal sort of thing behind it. You can feel like just a number, which can be really disheartening. And then I think throughout the process, it was very much like the communication was kept going, and then I had a full day assessment day on Teams, and we met graduates on that, the graduates that had just started their roles, and that made me want to start, I think. And I applied thinking, oh yeah, I want a job, and then after that day I was like, okay, I want to work at Samworth Brothers because of what they said about the company, and it was that like engagement with different people. And then it was Cohesion, I think it was you actually, Charlotte, that rang me the next day to said that I'd got it, and that was really nice, just knowing that I wouldn't have to wait for ages, and that I again wasn't just a number.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I suppose being treated like a real person, like a human, and not like a robot is great. Thank you.
I'm very conscious that this debating session could probably run all afternoon, and I think one of the downsides of not being face to face is that unfortunately we're probably going to have to draw this to a close. I know everyone has got busy afternoons, so I think, I mean, obviously the three of you, Abigail and Lilia, I think that's again really good insight. Obviously, you know, the data that we presented earlier is very high level and shows us percentages and this and that and all the rest of it. But the ability to actually probe these questions to you and get your personal take, I think is really, really important. So thank you for your time and agreeing to join us this afternoon. Just in conclusions then, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Megan, I think if we can just go to the final slide. Obviously, you know, a lot of this is relatively subjective, but I think there's a pattern or a trend that we've seen this afternoon that I think are a few key takeaways in terms of a few kind of prominent points that have been made. So the first one, obviously financial package, and not just on the basic package or the total package, but any starting bonus, holiday entitlement, car allowance, etc. We are seeing more and more that the candidates that we especially are working with within Cohesion, there's not the same loyalty to offer as perhaps it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. So, you know, candidates are moving for small incremental hikes in salary from other organizations. So I think the first thing there is to get that right. Obviously, the financial situation at the moment is only going to exaggerate that. A lot of organizations have reviewed their salaries for experienced hire. I think there's probably a question to put out there in terms of how much they're doing that for early talent programs as well. Second point is, if we just click through, associated offerings again. So last year, we did a huge amount of research looking very similar to the research that Martin and High Flyers does. We've broke that down by region, we broke it down by sector, we broke it down by gender. Every single cut of that data, the top two things that we came across was the importance of training and development and the importance of long-term career prospects. Obviously, there are a number of others, and I know Martin's kind of put those together as well today. So promote health and well-being, flexibility on working remotely, working environment, environmental statement, all of those things are part of the mix. But I think the key thing here is to actively promote these. So, you know, as an organization, you may have a flexible working policy, but unless you're promoting that when you're engaging with your potential workforce, it's almost going to be wasted. The other thing, which I know, which Pete alluded to earlier, was that more proactive engagement. So engage early, sustain communications, and then maintain that engagement as well. So Pete, I think you referenced 1 in 4 children at primary school are already starting to think about their careers. I'm not necessarily saying we open the doors to primary schools and talk about graduate programs, but it's the concept of engaging possibly year 9, year 10, etc. and then maintain that engagement throughout the process. Point 4 is data. There is so much information out there that we can now access. And we've absolutely, as an industry, we've got to utilize that to the benefit, to your organization's benefit. A wise man once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The number of times we speak to organizations and they just go, yeah, we're just going to do the same as last year, but hopefully we're going to get a different result. Hopefully some of the steps and some of the points that we've made today really point to some of the areas that just making small tweaks in the process can affect those results at the end of the process. And then the last point on point 5 is candidate centricity. So what we see, again, part of this is the increasing adoption of technology, is that there's online application forms, online video, online assessment, etc., etc. By putting candidates at the center of the process, and it was really good having the opportunity to hear from the graduates, what were students at the time, about that recruitment process is obviously absolutely critical. And again, making them feel human and not a number is absolutely key to the process. So a few kind of key kind of synopsis and recommendations from our perspective, and obviously from the intelligence that's been shared on today's talk. So just to wrap things up, thank you mainly to the panelists, to Abbas, Gail and Lillian for taking the time to join us this afternoon. It's always the most popular part of the session, but also a huge thank you to Martin from High Flyers and also Pete from UCAS. So without further ado, I'm going to wrap up. I think a recording of this can be posted online. So anybody who wants to reference any of those points, please feel free to get back in touch with us, or indeed Martin and Pete, and obviously we can share their contact details if they're happy for us to do so. So again, thank you very much everyone for your time, and look forward to speaking to you at some point soon. Many thanks.
Thanks very much.